Captain Reed's eyes opened slowly. Pain pulsed through his body, his head felt heavy, and a dull ache filled his chest. He blinked several times, trying to understand where he was. The ceiling above him was metal, scratched and glowing with soft blue lights. This wasn't Earth, and it definitely wasn't his battlefield. As he tried to sit up, he groaned in pain. His body was covered in bruises, and his right arm was bandaged tightly. The last thing he remembered was the explosion. He had been fighting near the outer rim, ambushed by a surprise enemy fleet. But now he was here, lying in a soft pod that felt like a hospital bed. "You're awake," a soft voice said. Reed turned his head slowly and saw an alien nurse, small, green-skinned, with long antennae and worried eyes. "You were brought here 3 days ago." She said, "You nearly died, Captain." "Where is this?" Reed asked, voice dry like sand. "You are in the Zalari Alliance Medical Center," she replied, handing him a cup of water. "You are safe now." Reed took a deep sip, then noticed something strange to the left side of his bed. There was another pod, and inside that pod sat a figure chained, quiet and unmoving. It was a girl, no older than her early 20s. Her skin was smooth and glowing faintly blue. Her eyes were wide, but lowered, not meeting his. She was not dressed like a nurse or a doctor. Her clothes were torn and thin, and a glowing collar was locked tightly around her neck. Her arms were chained to the wall behind her. She sat like a statue, completely still, like someone trained not to move, not to breathe too loudly. "Who is she?" Reed asked. Frowning, the nurse lowered her voice. "She was given to you, Captain." He froze. "Given to me?" "As a reward," the nurse whispered nervously. "The officer said she's a gift for your service. Your bravery." Reed turned back to look at the girl. She didn't look like a reward. She looked like a prisoner. Maybe worse, she had no shoes, her feet were dirty, and there were small cuts on her arms. Her long silver-white hair covered part of her face, but he could see the fear in her eyes. "What's her name?" he asked. "We don't know," the nurse said. "She hasn't spoken a word since she arrived." Reed's jaw tightened. This wasn't right. He didn't fight in wars, bleed for peace, just to be handed a living being like some prize. He sat up slowly, ignoring the pain, and looked directly at the girl. She flinched the moment his eyes met hers. Reed raised both his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently. She didn't respond. Didn't blink, just stared at the floor. A soldier entered the room, tall, rough, wearing battle armor. "Ah, you're awake." He laughed. "Like your reward? Pretty, isn't she?" Reed didn't answer. The soldier grinned. "Careful, though. She bites. They all do it first." Reed's fists clenched. "What did they do to her?" he asked quietly. The soldier shrugged. "Does it matter? She's yours now, enjoy." When the man left, Reed looked at the girl again. He noticed bruises near her wrists, likely from the chains. "Can I get these removed?" he asked the nurse. The nurse looked scared. "The collar?" "I'm not allowed, sir. Only command can authorize that." Reed sighed, then whispered to the girl, "You shouldn't be here, not like this." She didn't respond. He reached over to a tray of medical supplies and picked up a clean blanket. He walked over and gently laid it over her shoulders. She didn't move, but her eyes lifted slightly, just for a second, to look at him. That 1 second said more than any words could. She wasn't just some alien girl. She was scared, alone, and broken, and something deep in Reed's heart shifted. He didn't know her name or what she had been through, but one thing was now clear. She wasn't his reward. She was someone who needed saving. And maybe, just maybe, he had been saved so he could save her. Asterisk. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of machines. Captain Reed sat upright in his recovery pod, but his eyes were not on his wounds. They were fixed on the alien girl sitting just a few feet away. She still hadn't moved, still hadn't spoken. It was as if she was trying to disappear into the wall behind her. Her glowing blue skin looked pale now, like frost under moonlight. The blanket he had given her still hung over her shoulders, Untouched, Reed watched her quietly, unsure what to say. He had faced beasts in the void, machines that could tear a man apart, but nothing prepared him for this, the silent presence of someone so broken. So afraid. Do you have a name? He asked gently. The girl didn't lift her head, didn't blink, didn't answer. Reed sighed and leaned back against the pod. His own body still ached, but his heart ached more now. A nurse returned with a data pad, checking his vitals. She hasn't eaten, Reed said, motioning toward the girl. The nurse gave a quick glance, then looked away. We placed food near her, but she won't touch it. Because she's scared, Reed muttered. Because she thinks we'll hurt her. The nurse hesitated, then whispered, "They used to shock her when she disobeyed." Reed clenched his jaw. The collar, the chains, the silence, it all made sense now. This girl hadn't just been captured. She had been controlled, trained to obey. Punished for even breathing wrong after the nurse left. Reed pushed aside the pain in his ribs and stood slowly. He took the food tray in his hands, a soft piece of bread, a boiled root vegetable, and a cup of water. Step by step, he walked toward her. Careful not to make sudden moves, she flinched when he got close, her chained hands pulling back instinctively. He stopped a few feet away and crouched down, placing the tray gently on the floor. "I'm not going to force you," he said softly. "This is yours, if you want it." Still no answer. Still no movement. Reed stood and returned to his pod. Hours passed, maybe more. And then, just when he was closing his eyes, he heard a faint sound. He looked over. She had moved, very slowly. She pulled the tray toward her with the tips of her fingers. She didn't eat the bread first, or the vegetable. She picked up the water and brought it to her lips, sipping so carefully like a bird. Reed didn't say a word. He didn't want to scare her back into silence. But inside, something warm flickered in his chest thrust. The beginning of it. The next day, Reed asked the guards if he could take her outside. "Orders are orders," one of them barked. "You can look at her, not walk her," Reed replied calmly. Then changed the orders, after much argument and a few threats. He got a small pass 15 minutes in the garden. Guarded, of course, but it was enough. The garden was small, artificial, and full of alien plants glowing under fake sunlight. Reed walked with a limp, but the girl followed behind, still in chains. He asked her again, "Do you have a name?" She remained quiet, looking at the flowers like they were the only safe thing in the world. "Do you want me to name you?" he asked. She paused for a second, but then turned her face away. "No," she whispered. Reed froze. It was the first word she had spoken to him. It was barely a whisper, but it hit like thunder. "No name," she added after a moment. He didn't push her. "Okay," he said. "Then I'll just call you you for now." She gave no response, but her steps slowed. Maybe she didn't hate that idea. Later that evening, another soldier came to visit. Reed didn't like him. The man sneered at the girl and asked Reed, "So, have you trained her yet?" Reed stood up slowly. "No, and I'm not going to." The soldier chuckled. "Then you're wasting your reward." Reed walked toward him, his voice cold. "She's not a thing, she's a person." "Careful, Captain." The soldier hissed. "Some people might think you're growing soft." "Good," Reed replied. "Let them." That night Reed sat alone, watching the stars from the window. He remembered Earth, his sister, the promises he made to never become like the monsters they fought. He looked back at the girl, still sitting quietly in her corner, chains still tight, collar still glowing. But she was watching him now, her eyes not full of fear, but something else, something quieter, gentler. She still wouldn't say his name. But she was listening, and that meant something. Captain Reed couldn't sleep that night. The memory of the girl's voice saying, "No," repeated in his mind like an echo. It was the first time she had spoken, and it wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall she had built around her. Heart, he wanted to know more about her, not out of curiosity, but because she deserved to be seen. The next morning, while the medical staff checked his healing progress, Reed kept watching the collar on her neck. It blinked softly blue, then green, then red. Most people might not notice, but Reed had experience with tech like that. He had seen similar collars, used in war zones to track enemy prisoners. This wasn't just a shock collar, it was a tracker. After the staff left, Reed carefully moved toward her. She was sitting with her knees pulled to her chest, arms still chained, watching him without fear this time. He pointed at the collar and asked gently, "Do you know what this does?" She didn't speak, but her eyes shifted downward, then away. That was enough of an answer. "It tracks you, doesn't it?" He whispered, still no reply. "But why? Who's watching you?" That question stayed in his mind all day. Later, when the guards left for lunch rotation, Reed took a risk. He accessed the corner terminal in the hallway. Being a decorated soldier had its perks. His clearance level was higher than most. He plugged in his ID chip and searched the registry of assigned alien assets. He scrolled past pages of numbers and code names until he found her asset, X-97 Alira. Status: confidential royal subject, Zarthan Syndicate, origin unknown. Purpose: personal reward for commander-grade soldiers. Restrictions: collar must remain active at all times. Contains live tracker. Reed's heart froze. Royal subject. She wasn't just some slave, she was someone important. Someone hidden, maybe even hunted. Her name was Alira. He stared at the screen for a long time. Reading every word twice, he knew the Zarthan Syndicate, one of the cruelest factions in the galaxy. They sold people like objects and erased their identities. If Alira was once royalty, they had made sure no one would ever know. Reed returned to the room quietly. Alira looked at him with curious eyes. He knelt beside her and spoke gently. "Alira," her eyes widened. She stiffened as if struck. "That's your name, isn't it?" He said. She didn't answer, but her breathing quickened. She tried to hide it, but her hands shook slightly in the chains. "You don't have to pretend anymore," he added. "I know who you are. Don't say it." She whispered suddenly. Her voice was broken, shaky, like it hadn't been used in years. "Please, don't speak that name out loud." Reed nodded. "Okay," he said softly. "Not unless you want me to." Later that day, he made another decision. He had to disable that collar, as long as it blinked. Someone out there was watching her, waiting to take her back, using a stolen data key. Reed returned to the terminal again. He bypassed the standard access wall and downloaded the collar's code encryption. The system warned him tampering will trigger alert to the Zarthan grid. He didn't care. He had to try back in the room while Alira slept. He connected the data key to the collar. The lights flickered blue, then red. He entered the code. Sweating, heart pounding in his chest, and then the blinking stopped. The collar's light turned off. The tracker was dead. Reed sighed in relief until a loud alarm blared through the hallway. He cursed it under his breath. It had sent a one-time emergency ping before shutting down. They knew. Whoever owned her, whoever wanted her back, was coming. Alira woke up with a start. Eyes darting around, Reed put a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, I stopped the signal, but they might come looking." "You shouldn't have done that," she said, barely above a whisper. "I had to," he replied. "You're not a prize. Alira, you're a person, and I won't let them take you again." For the first time, she looked at him directly. Her eyes were strange, glowing with soft silver light. Ancient and young at the same time. "You will get punished for this," she said. "Maybe," he replied. "But at least I'll go down doing something right." That night, the base was placed on alert. Strange signals were picked up near the edge of the solar system, unmarked ships approaching. Reed sat near the window, watching the stars. Alira sat beside him, not chained, not afraid anymore. She still refused to say her name, but when Reed whispered it softly, "Alira," she didn't flinch. She simply closed her eyes and leaned just a little bit closer to him, for the first time since waking up in that cold room. Reed didn't feel like he had been given a reward. He felt like he had been given a purpose. Asterisk. The silence inside the base was no longer peaceful. It was sharp and cold, like the calm before a storm. Captain Reed stood near the observation deck. watching as distant stars began to disappear behind the silhouette of something large, something coming closer. He had seen warships before, but the ones now entering the sector were different. They didn't belong to the Alliance or any known faction. They were unmarked, black, and moved like shadows, predators, not visitors in his gut. Reed already knew who they were. The Zarthan Syndicate had answered the tracker's final signal. They were coming for Alira, back in the recovery wing. Alira sat silently, her back against the wall. The collar around her neck no longer glowed, and the chains had been removed, but freedom wasn't peace. Her eyes were alert, listening to every distant footstep, every shift in the base's power hum. She knew what was coming, even before Reed walked in. "They're here, aren't they?" she asked without looking at him. He nodded. "3 ships, maybe more," he said. "No signals, no flags, just drifting in slowly like vultures." Alira stood up, her movements slow but steady. "They'll wait," she said. "They won't attack yet. Not until they confirm I'm here. Then we leave before they do." Reed replied. Alira turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Where will we go?" "They will chase me across the stars. Then we'll keep moving," he said. "Until they give up. Or until we make them stop." Reed didn't mention the punishment he'd face for what he'd done, disabling military-issued equipment, hiding a classified asset. None of that mattered now. He had made his choice. They had 12 hours before the enemy ships reached docking range. He requested access to a repair hangar, claiming he needed it for private recovery prep. The guards gave him a look, but no one stopped him. Inside, Reed found an old cargo pod half broken, barely functional, but small and fast. It had no weapons and weak shields, but it could get them off the station. Alira stood beside the pod, looking at it with strange familiarity. "This model," she said, touching the panel gently. "My people used it centuries ago to escape our dying moon." Reed looked at her, surprised. "You remember that?" "Pieces," she said. "Sometimes in dreams, sometimes in flashes, like smoke that won't clear." They worked together, Reed fixing circuits, Alira scanning frequencies. They were different, yet somehow in sync. 2 survivors, thrown together by fate. 2 strangers building their way out of danger. Hours passed, and the warning lights in the hallway began to blink red. The Syndicate's lead ship had docked without permission. Base security scrambled, but they weren't prepared for this level of threat. Reed knew time had run out. He grabbed the sidearm and handed another one to Alira. She looked at it but didn't take it. "I've never fired one," she said. "Then stay behind me." He answered. She nodded. As they slipped into the launch bay, alarms blared all around them. The pod's engine stuttered, then hummed to life. Reed climbed into the pilot's seat, while Alira strapped in beside him. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the corridor. Armed Syndicate hunters in black armor appeared, shouting in a language Reed didn't know. "Hold on!" he yelled, and slammed the launch button. The pod jerked forward, smashing through the partial gate, just as blaster fire lit up the air behind them. They shot out into the black of space like a bullet from a broken gun. Inside, everything rattled. Sparks flew, and warning lights flashed. "We're not going far," Reed said through clenched teeth. "But we're not theirs either." Alira looked back at the shrinking space station, her hands gripping the seat tightly. "That place was a prison," she whispered. "You were the first one who didn't treat me like a thing." Reed looked at her. "You're not a thing, Alira. You're someone worth running for." The pod flew toward a dark zone of space known as the Black Veil. No one entered it unless they were desperate. It was filled with asteroid fields, magnetic storms, and dead satellites. Perfect for disappearing, terrible for surviving. "We'll hide here for a while," Reed said, guiding the ship between spinning debris. "And then?" Alira asked. "Then we find help, or we make our own," he replied. The pod's power began to drop, one system after another blinking out. They would need to land soon, maybe on one of the drifting moons in the belt, but for now, they had made it. Out for now, they were free. Behind them, The syndicate ship searched blindly, angry and confused. They didn't know where the pod had gone, not yet, but Reed knew they'd keep looking, still. As he looked at Alira beside him, no longer chained, no longer silent, he felt no fear. He had chosen this path, and so had she. Together, they would. Keep running, keep fighting, until the galaxy saw her not as a reward, but as a voice that refused to stay silent. The stars outside looked peaceful, but the inside of the escape pod was falling apart. Warning lights blinked across every panel. Smoke rose from the back vents, and the main display kept flashing red. Critical systems failing. Captain Reed gripped the manual control lever tightly, trying to hold the ship steady. Beside him, Alira held onto her seat, eyes focused and calm. Her body swayed with the motion, but she didn't scream, didn't panic. She had seen worse, but even she knew they were about to crash. Hang on, Reed shouted. He jerked the ship toward the nearest moon on the nav screen. It was uncharted, small, surrounded by asteroid fragments and floating wrecks, but it was their only chance to survive. The pod shook violently as it entered the moon's thin atmosphere. A metal panel tore off the side with a loud screech. Alira shut her eyes, whispering something in her language, a soft chant like a prayer. Reed's hand burned from the overheated controls, but he didn't let go. The ship tilted, spiraled, then slammed into the moon's surface with a deafening crash. Dust flew in every direction. The pod skidded across the rocky plain before finally stopping near a line of jagged cliffs. For a moment, everything was still. Then Reed groaned in pain. His shoulder had slammed into the control panel, and his leg was bleeding badly. He tried to move but hissed in pain. Alira unbuckled herself, crawling over broken wires and loose panels to reach him. "Don't move," she said softly. "I'll help." She tore a strip from her tunic and wrapped it around his leg. Pressing hard to stop the bleeding, Reed tried to protest, but she shook her head. "Be quiet," she said, voice calm but firm. "You saved me, now I save you." Reed gave a weak laugh. "Fair trade," he whispered, but inside he was worried. He had no idea if the ship had enough power to send a signal, or even keep them warm. The moon was cold, barren, and lifeless. Alira helped him out of the pod. They walked slowly, Reed leaning on her shoulder. They reached a nearby rock formation that provided some shelter from the wind. Alira used scrap metal and pieces of the ship to create a small fire pit. She struck sparks using exposed wires and bits of dried plant material she found growing near the rocks. The fire flickered weakly, but it was enough. Reed lay back, breathing hard. Alira sat beside him, staring at the stars now hidden behind the smoky sky. "You knew what you were doing," he said. "Back in the pod, during the crash." She nodded slowly. "My people escaped like this once, long ago," she said. "They taught us to build fire with scraps, to heal without machines, to hide without fear." Reed looked at her with new eyes. She wasn't just a victim, not anymore. She was a survivor, a fighter with memories buried deep inside her bones. "You're stronger than you think," he said. She didn't reply, but her lips curled into a faint smile, just for a moment. They spent the night under the stars. Reed drifted in and out of sleep. Every time he opened his eyes, Alira was still awake, keeping watch, her eyes scanning the dark horizon. She didn't trust the quiet, and she was right. By morning, strange lights moved in the sky. The syndicate was still searching. They hadn't found them yet, but they would. Alira helped Reed stand. They had to keep moving. She led him toward a narrow canyon, her movements quick and certain. "This way," she said. "There might be a cave system nearby. My people once hid in places like this." They followed the canyon path for hours. Finally, they found it, a hidden cave, covered by vines and shaped by time. Inside, it was dry and deep, perfect for hiding. Alira used her fingers to draw shapes in the dirt. Old maps, half-forgotten routes from her childhood. "I think there's a buried outpost somewhere beyond the ridge," she said. "If we can reach it, we might find parts, power, even a signal booster." Reed leaned against the cave wall, watching her. "You're leading now," he said. Alira looked up, surprised. "You're not the same girl I found in chains." He added, "You're something more now." Her face softened, but her voice was strong. "You believed in me first," she said. "That gave me strength." The cave grew cold as night returned. Alira sat closer to him now. She looked at the bandage on his leg and gently changed it. Her hands were steady, practiced. Reed winced but smiled. "You'd make a good soldier." She chuckled. "Maybe, but I'd rather be free." He nodded. "That's worth fighting for." Outside, the sky was no longer quiet. The hunters were near, but this time, Alira wasn't going to run blindly. She had a plan, and she had a partner tomorrow. They would head toward the ridge, together, not as soldier and slave, but as two people who refused to be hunted anymore. The cave was dark and silent, but Captain Reed couldn't sleep. His wounded leg throbbed with pain, and his thoughts were sharp with worry. Alira sat across from him, awake, her eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. She had barely spoken all night. Her mind was somewhere else. Somewhere far away. Finally, she looked up. "They will find us soon," she said. Reed nodded slowly. "I know." There was no more time to run. The syndicate was closing in, and their hiding place would soon be discovered. Alira stood and walked toward the cave entrance, staring out into the night. A faint hum echoed in the distant ships, moving low across the sky. Hunters, machines of war. They were close. Reed dragged himself to a sitting position, groaning from the pain. "We have to fight," he said. Alira turned to him, her face calm but determined. "I know," she replied, "but we fight smart." The two of them spent the next few hours preparing traps using whatever scraps they had left. Broken ship wires, fuel cells, metal panels, even rocks. Reed taught her how to make pressure plates and tripwires. She, in return, showed him how to disguise traps with sand and shadows. Together, they turned the cave and the surrounding terrain into a deadly maze. Reed leaned back, breathing heavily. "You've done this before," he said. Alira didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, "I escaped once, long ago, when I was still a child, but I didn't make it far. This time I finish it, just before sunrise." They heard the sound they were waiting for. Boots, crunching gravel, echoing voices in a harsh alien tongue. The syndicate had arrived. Reed hid behind a boulder near the entrance, blaster in hand. Alira crouched above the path, ready to strike. Her hands gripped a long piece of metal sharpened like a blade. Her eyes burned with quiet rage. She was no longer a girl in chains. She was something else now. The first soldier stepped onto the pressure plate. There was a click, then a small explosion. He was thrown backward, hitting the rock wall hard. The others shouted, scattering into position, but more traps followed. One fell into a pit hidden under a layer of dust. Another was caught in a web of electrified wires. The rest grew cautious, but it was too late. Reed opened fire from cover, striking one in the chest. Alira moved like a shadow, slashing with her blade, fast and silent. Her strikes were precise, her movements graceful. This was her world now, but then, the syndicate's leader stepped forward. He was taller than the rest, wearing reinforced armor and a cruel expression. In his hand was a plasma rifle, aimed directly at Reed. "You should have left her where she belonged," he growled. Reed didn't flinch. "And where's that?" He spat. "At your feet? In chains?" "No thanks," the leader fired. Reed tried to dodge, but his leg gave out. The bolt hit him in the side, and he collapsed to the ground with a cry. Alira screamed louder than she ever had. It wasn't fear, it was fury. She ran straight at the leader, dodging blasts and flying debris. He turned to shoot her, but she was too fast. She leaped forward and drove her blade into the weak spot under his helmet. His eyes widened in shock, then went dark. He dropped to the ground. Lifeless, silence followed. The few remaining syndicate soldiers ran. They had seen enough. They didn't want to fight a girl who had killed their commander with her bare hands. Alira dropped to her knees beside Reed. He was bleeding, eyes half open. "You came for me," he whispered. "You saved me." She pressed her hands against his wound, her fingers shaking. "I told you," she said. "If you fall, I will rise." He smiled. Weakly, "Didn't think you'd be the one protecting me." She looked into his eyes. "You gave me strength," she said. "Now I give it back." She dragged him back into the cave. She tore off her cloak to cover him. She searched their supplies and used every bit of medicine they had left. She didn't sleep. She didn't cry. She just worked until the bleeding stopped and his breathing returned to normal. Hours later, Reed opened his eyes again. Alira was sitting beside him, eyes closed but awake. "You stayed," he said. "Of course," she replied. "You are not my master, but you are mine." Reed reached out and gently took her hand. "No," he said. "We're equals now." Outside the cave, the moon was quiet again. The syndicate was gone, and in the dust of battle, a new bond had formed. Not one of control, but one of trust, loyalty, and something more. The cave was quiet again. The fire had burned low, but it was still warm enough to keep the cold away. Captain Reed lay resting, his wound slowly healing. Alira sat close beside him, watching over him like a guardian who would never leave again. She had not slept, not even for a minute. Her mind replayed the battle over and over. But this time, it didn't end in chains. This time, it ended with victory. Reed stirred in his sleep. Groaning slightly, Alira leaned forward, gently placing a cool cloth on his forehead. "You are safe," she whispered. "And so am I." The sun rose over the broken moon, casting golden light across the jagged cliffs. The syndicate had fled, leaving no sign of return. The enemy ships had vanished from orbit, retreating into the darkness they came from. For the first time in a long time, there was peace. When Reed opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was her still by his side. He smiled weakly. "You're still here," he said. "I told you I wouldn't leave you," she replied softly. Reed sat up slowly, pain flickering in his side. He looked around the cave, then back at her. "Did we win?" Alira gave a small nod. "We survived." "That's enough," he said with a grin. "For now." Later that day, while Reed rested, Alira explored beyond the ridge. She remembered the map she had drawn in the dirt, the one from her childhood memory. She followed the terrain, her steps careful and alert. After 2 hours, she found it. Half buried in the dust was an old outpost, rusted and forgotten. But inside were broken machines, signal parts, and a working solar array. Hope. She returned with what she could carry and began rebuilding the transmitter. Reed watched her work, amazed by her focus. "You've changed," he said. Alira paused and looked at him. "No," she said. "I just finally remembered who I was." She finished the signal booster by nightfall together. They sent a message, a coded distress call to the Zilari rebels, a group that fought against the syndicate. If anyone would help them, it would be them. 3 days passed before the signal was answered. A small rebel ship landed quietly near the ridge. 3 warriors stepped out, their faces covered, their weapons ready. But when they saw Alira, they lowered their arms. One of them stepped forward and removed his helmet. His eyes widened. "Princess Alira," he whispered. "We thought you were dead." Reed's head snapped toward her. "Princess?" he said, confused. Alira looked down. "It was my name before I was taken," she said quietly. "I was the daughter of the last free Moon Queen before the syndicate invaded. I was just a child when they took me." The rebel leader knelt before her. "You've returned to us," he said. "You carry the blood of the stars." Reed was speechless. She had been royalty this whole time, and she never said a word. But now it made sense. Her grace, her fire, her strength. She had never been a slave. She had always been something more. The rebels offered to take her to their capital. She could be restored as a symbol of hope, but Alira hesitated. She turned to Reed, who was now standing with effort, leaning on a metal staff. "You can go," he said. "You belong with them." She stepped closer and shook her head. "I belong where I choose to be." He looked at her carefully. "And where is that?" She reached out and took his hand. "With the one who saw me before I remembered who I was. With the one who didn't need a crown to treat me like I mattered," Reed smiled. "Then let's go together." The rebel ship took off hours later, Alira. And Reed sat side by side inside it, for the first time. She was not hiding, not afraid, and Reed wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was something else, her protector, her partner, her beginning. As the stars passed by outside the ship, Alira leaned her head on Reed's shoulder. "I used to dream of being free," she said. "And now?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Now I dream of what we'll build next. The galaxy would remember the girl who rose from chains, and the human who saw her not as a reward, but as a reason to fight, and in that quiet, endless night among the stars." A new story began, one not written in blood or chains, but in trust, freedom, and love.